bloodshed, certainly in the last centuries, than any other single force.
Growing up behind the Iron Curtain, what was that like?
I could actually look across a wall and see the dismal, dark, broken down Eastern Bloc, and then just turn around and look back at the West and see the difference. Prosperity, happiness, everything. The most disappointing organization I've ever heard of is Queers for Palestine. Let me assure you, in most of the Middle Eastern countries, you're dead. I work a lot in the Muslim world and love my Muslim friends, but you put another million Muslim immigrants in Europe, rapes skyrocket, abuse of women skyrockets. I've said this publicly in the Muslim world, and they agree.
What do you think about the weaponization of the DOJ right now?
I think that's unbelievably dangerous. You are moving very closely to being a dictatorial state. Near Nazis, you're near the communist parties of major nations, the dark days of the Russian Empire. That is very serious.
Stephen Mansfield, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, man. It's great to be with you.
Yeah, thank you. Really interesting career as I was looking into you. New York Times bestselling author. You've written over 30 books,
yes,
from my understanding, and you have a PhD in history. Is that correct? Yeah. So a lot of knowledge, and I'm really looking forward to kind of getting to know you here.
Me too. Me too.
Yeah. So where are you from? You said you were came from a military family. What was that like growing up in a military family?
Yeah, my father was an Army officer. He was a military intelligence officer. So we lived mainly in Europe and uniquely in Berlin during the Cold War. So I actually lived behind the Iron Curtain.
Wow.
And Dad was on alert all the time. He was special forces, Russian linguist. I mean, he was the real snake eater kind of military. So I had a very unusual upbringing. Grew up mainly with French, German, British youth, and I really appreciate that perspective.
Yeah, because growing up kind of behind the Iron Curtain, I mean, you were kind of there for a major piece of history and have a probably unique understanding of it. What was that like? What did you really learn from that, and how do you kind of apply that to your philosophy now?
I'm really grateful for that background because I could actually look across a wall and see the dismal, dark, broken down Eastern Bloc, communist territory, and then just turn around on a riser and look back at the West and see the difference. Prosperity, happiness, everything. I'm not saying the West is perfect, but you rarely have, most people don't have in their lives a line right through the middle of a city where they can say, that doesn't work, and this does. People are trying to escape over there, and here they're, wanting to drill down. So it was profound for me, and especially since I'm patriotic, I'm in D.C. to try to fix your government, trying to make a difference. But always in the back of my mind is what I've seen not work, of communism and oppression and tyranny and things of that nature.
Is it weird for you now looking at society, especially like Gen Z, the protests, let's call them the pro-Hamas protests at the college campuses, and really pushing this communist idea openly?
Yeah, it really is a shock to me. I mean, there's a lot of blame to go around, the schools, universities, our culture, what have you. But, I'm old enough to have seen communism fall and to have the conclusion, well, that's over. We had that experiment. We had the Stalinist experiment. We had all that kind of thing, and it didn't work. Mm-hmm. So while we got to find some new models, if you don't teach a generation what the truth is, and they get a little bit older, I know I'm sounding like the old man here, well, then they're on campuses chanting Marxist slogans and down with America, and then, of course, we can get into the Israel thing. And the fact is they just haven't been taught. They just don't have the examples. And so they're freely going neo-Marxist without realizing the consequences, whereas Marxism has brought more bloodshed, certainly in the last centuries, than any other single force. So it's a sadness they don't know it, and I'm hoping we don't have to live through it again.
I mean, do you think that was like an intelligence operation maybe from other countries, like bringing those ideas into the colleges and through the professors to teach a generation?
I don't think they're forward influences. I do think it's, and I'm not trying to be hardcore right-wing here, but I do think it's left-wing professors, A university, I'm part-time part of a university, and a university is in a unique place. It's not necessarily checked by the real world, right? Like if you're in their business school, that can get real academic, and you're not really out there on the market having to deal with the thrust and the parry of whatever the market's doing. Same thing with intellectual and political ideas. So you can be in a university. I mean, some of the craziest ideas in history have sprung up from universities because they're not necessarily, they're a little isolated from the real world. So I think it's left-leaning professors, kind of 60s professors, the boomers kind of grown up and, now they're the chairman of those departments. I also think a lot of the anti-Israel stuff and a lot of the Neo-Marxism does come from foreign students, foreign professors. We know, for example, a lot of what's going on right now are international students. And I love the Middle East, do a lot in the Arab world. I'm not a bigot against it, but there's no question. You see the crowds chanting, "We love Hamas missiles." That is, for the most part, Middle Eastern students who are leading American, suburban kids astray.
Yeah, and you had posted something, and I'm going to paraphrase, but it basically said that you can support Israel, acknowledge that Hamas is a terrorist organization, have empathy and sympathy for the Palestinian people, and have these different kind of logical ideas that I think society right now, at least they want you to believe that we got to be put into these boxes.
Yes.
And why do you think that is? And how do you think that we can kind of open people's minds to, there can be multiple truths at the same time?
Somebody said once that real intelligence is being able to hold two competing thoughts in your mind at the same time.
Yeah.
And our social media, our current society, the tensions between generations, they cause people to isolate, silo, all the terms that we use these days. But the reality is, I'm not saying I'm the only one, but certainly I'm out there in the field in the Middle East seeing these things. And it's not black and white. It's shades of gray.
Right.
I'm pro-Israel. I am. And I think that Israel's way overdoing it with the violence against Gaza. I understand they're mad about the 1,400 people horribly murdered on October 7th. But you have to be proportional. That's the Christian just war theory that I happen to subscribe to. You have to be proportional in your response. And so they've way overdone it. Even if we use the 30,000 number, which I think is Hamas numbers, I think it's less than that, but whatever. Too many people have been killed. Too much damage has been done. It's going to take a generation or two to restore what's been lost. We didn't have to do it that way. Well, here I am, pro-Israel, criticizing Israel. I thought that was what loyal friends did, right? That's what good ideas should do. And so I sympathize with Israel, but I'm just aware that the youth on the campuses just don't have any idea really what they're talking about. In fact, one of my favorite people is a Israeli actress and activist named Noah Tishby. She'll go on the campuses and she's pretty and she's carrying a microphone. They think she's CNN. And she'll say, "What does from the river to the sea mean?" They say they don't know. Who sponsors Hamas? They don't know. I mean, she just goes through 20 questions. Before long, you realize that somebody in the dorm said, "Hey, these guys are got to be protested. There's a protest tomorrow too. Let's get out there." And everybody filed out, and they have really very little idea of what they're talking about. So I appreciate the desire to bring social change.
Sure.
But I say with all love, they're idiots. Idiot means unlearned one. They're unlearned when it comes to the Middle East, and it's really doing a lot of damage.
Yeah, I saw an interview with like a Gays for Palestine person, and they asked the person, do you realize that if you were in Palestine before, this started, that you would be killed or
on the street?
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely, yeah.
And they're like, "Oh no, is that right?" And
sure, they have no
the
idea.
lack of knowledge from this person that's protesting, it was astonishing.
Right.
Really.
Yeah. The weirdest, the most. The most disappointing organization I've ever heard of is Queers for Palestine. Let me assure you, and in most of the Middle Eastern countries, you're dead.
Yeah.
You walk down the street dressed like they often do in our cities, you're dead. So I'm not saying that's right. Obviously, what I'm saying is they clearly don't know what they're protesting. It's because we've missed a generation of good transfer of cultural values.
Well, why do you think that we've missed that generation? Why do you think that it was kind of skipped over?
I really do think the boomers, Cultural Revolution, 60s, 70s, well-intentioned. Then they silo in universities, and most of them can point to a professor who's taught them what they believe. And it really is Neo-Marxism. It really is a view that if there's three of us in a room, one of us has to be an oppressor. And that's often not the case, right? I'm Native American. You're not oppressing me. We're both sitting here. We could have 15 other people of different ethnicities. There's not necessarily an oppressor in the room. But history has to be looked that way. Somebody has to be the oppressor. Somebody has to be doing it to someone else. Everything has to be interpreted through that grid. Everything's gender. Everything's race. Well, you don't get an accurate view of history, and you certainly don't build a just society with that framework.
Yeah, I feel like society right now is rewarding people for being oppressed. It's like the oppression Olympics.
Right.
Who I'm more oppressed. No, I'm more oppressed.
No, there's no question.
The reality is, you think about like when we talk to underserved communities and we say, "Oh, you're oppressed or you're marginalized." My concern always is, by telling these kids those things, what if they actually believe it?
Yeah.
Because if they believe it, then they're going to be that.
Right. Right. And also, there's a view that people who are seriously oppressed don't have time to think about the cosmetics.
Right.
For example, I live in D.C. part of the year, as you know, and so we had the whole Redskins discussion about the football team. But I listened to a chief say, when he was interviewed, he said, "Look, I've got poverty on the reservations. I've got an educational crisis. I've got health crises. We've got, gambling is the big salvation on the Indian reservation. I don't have time to think about these kinds of things. This is not important to me. So here is a Cherokee chief. And of course, who's pushing the change of the name of the Redskins? White liberals.
Right.
And the Native Americans are like, I could care less. Let's get on with the health care.
Call them the woke whiteys.
Exactly. So I'm not saying those things aren't important. In some cases, of course, I know what Redskin means in the Native American history, but I thought it was hilarious. This chief kind of looked and said, I really couldn't care less. Let's do meaningful things, not just cosmetic things.
Yeah, I'm always taken back when I hear white people talk about some of these issues, liberal white people, and they're well intended, but they're actually many times racist in saying it.
Yes.
You talk about like black people can't get IDs. It's like, what are you saying?
Right. Yeah. Like, for example, if a free market is automatically bigoted against black people, that's me saying black people can't perform at an equal level. Well, they can't. Just give them a level playing field.
Exactly.
And to say otherwise is to label them all, some kind of subpar. So I think there's a lot of reverse racism, especially in the universities.
Yeah. What do you think about all the equality of outcome or the equality of opportunity?
Yeah, that's just not reality. That's, again, somebody sitting in a library somewhere thinking up these. That's not the way it works. You want equality of opportunity. You can't guarantee equality of outcomes. People are going to rise to their level. You may be a better businessman than I am. We may be in the same industry. Yeah. I'll prosper at a certain level. You'll do 5 times that amount. Nobody's being oppressed. Nobody's being, mistreated. It's just the way that it is. Are people smarter, people more gifted, people who have 6 generations of wealth in their family, and people who fell off the boat yesterday and are just now starting to build something. And that is the way the world works. And if we try to guarantee equal outcomes, we're just going to impoverish everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you see it with someone who moves to the country legally.
Yeah.
And they, the families get together and they pool their money. And,
yes.
I've seen this written. I haven't actually found like a study that shows it, but people that are immigrants coming to the country are more likely to become a millionaire than someone who was born here.
Right.
And it makes sense because they see the American dream for what it is. They're not being taught that there's this oppression in America or there's this or that. They're being taught there's unlimited opportunity.
Exactly, and they believe it.
They believe it.
Yeah, there's a doctor here in town you may be familiar with, Ming Wang, and he's brilliant, and he's innovated a whole lot of LASIK surgery procedures and what have you, and so he's mega wealthy. And I think he's first generation.
Yeah.
Well, they've just done a movie about his life. So he's gone from China Revolution, having to escape that, to America, education, to mega wealth and stardom as a doctor. In 1 generation. Well, he's passed me up. Have I been oppressed? No.
Right.
He's actually a friend that I think the world of him, but I'm just saying, if you think that way, you're just going to resent anybody who's got something you don't. And that's going to kill our society.
Yeah, it's always interesting for me to talk to people from China that lived through the Cultural Revolution.
Yes.
I've got a scientist that's on our advisory board who is assistant chief of infectious disease and immunogenetics for the NIH. Brilliant PhD. And, hearing her stories of how, basically they took the higher ups in society and put them in the field working. And it just, you had 30 million or so people that we know of died, during that. And they really get the opportunity of America.
Yes.
That American dream. And I feel like we got to figure out how to get that to the people that are actually born here.
Right. Right. Foreigners tend to get that a little bit more quickly. I work with the Kurds, as you know. I was just in Iraq a few weeks ago. And I have actually met Kurds fresh from the fields, fresh from the battlefields back when Saddam was oppressing them. I mean, blood on their clothing, literally. They're 1 generation in, doctors, lawyers, successful shopkeepers, because they lived over there. They understood what America was, couldn't wait to get here. And when they did, they understood it was a land of opportunity.
Yes.
And they didn't resent their status at all. They were grateful we took them in. And so you're absolutely right. There's a generation that's completely lost that, born indigenously. And if we don't reclaim that, of course, they're going to carry us astray again. We'll have to relive some of these dark periods of history.
Yeah, you are a big supporter of the Kurdish population. I think Nashville has the largest amount of Kurds.
Largest number of Kurds of any city in America.
What's your background with that? How did you come to support them?
I was here in Nashville in the 90s and just working with some organizations and helping organizations, social good organizations. And because there had already been Kurds here from the 70s, the Kurds being very tribal, they said basically, Uncle Joe's in Nashville, that's where we want to go. And when the U.S. was relocating them, they just began to pour them into Nashville. So we have about 25,000 Kurds now. And they love America. They love the American soldiers that liberated them. They love our pilots that, flew the no-fly zone that protected them. And they love the fact that we helped them. But because they come from sort of a Middle Eastern, I'm not being insulting to say this, kind of a bizarre free market kind of a situation, they understood what America was, and they got busy. Yeah. And they've prospered, and they've done well. It's interesting. The Kurds really are the way we want the Middle East to go. They are 95% Muslim, pro-Israel, pro-free market, pro-America. I know Muslim Kurds who turn and pray towards Jerusalem, not towards Mecca.
Interesting.
Many Kurds are Jewish, by the way, given their history. And so I think they're an amazing people, and I think we've got to really work closely with them because, like I say, I think they are the direction we want the Middle East to go.
And you wrote a book on that
I did. It was called The Miracle of the Kurds. Yeah.
What was that about?
Well, it started with the idea that the Kurds came here and I got introduced to them. But then I began to look at them worldwide. The largest people group in the world without their own homeland, like we've said. And they are people who are just doing amazing things around the world. 35 million of them, oppressed, gassed, mistreated by Saddam. And here they are thriving everywhere they are in the world. And I was just in northern Iraq, KRG, that's the Kurdish portion of Iraq. And it's unbelievable. They're hooked up to the NASDAQ. They're building skyscrapers. I mean, whenever you give them some freedom, they'll take over the world. And so I was impressed with them. I'm also a scholar of biblical history, and so they consider themselves the descendants of the ancient Medes in the scriptures. Their national anthem even says, "We are the Medes." So people who are Bible readers will encounter them, in the Old Testament. And so I was fascinated by their history, and it's amazing what they've accomplished. Really amazing.
You do have a background. You were a preacher at Belmont Church.
Yes, I pastored for Belmont for 10 years.
About 10 years. When I look at society right now, and I've gotten closer and closer to God the last few years,
Good.
really. I was raised Church of Christ here in Nashville, but kind of moved away from my faith a little bit in my 20s, had some doubts, and it's come back really strong. But I look at society, and it's kind of simple in a way, good versus evil. I mean, do you see that simplicity being shown more today than maybe 20 years ago?
Yeah, whenever you have a time in history where people are living out the implications of what they believe or living out their unrestrained lives, which is kind of what's happening today, you're going to see good and evil both starkly displayed.
Yes.
So all you have to do is make a run on Twitter or X, whatever you want to call it, and you see these horrible videos, people being pummeled to death, girls out for a run, being beaten and raped. I mean, we're having it thrown in our faces. But I think both good and evil are proliferating even more today, and we're more aware of it because of our media. Everybody has a video camera in their pocket, and so we're more deeply aware of it. But I think it's an intriguing time to be alive, tragic, but intriguing, because we're going to see a real out-and-out contest between good and evil. They're not just going to be hidden in churches or hidden in their homes or doing evil undercover. People are doing it right out on the streets, and we're going to see what happens.
Well, I think it's interesting, too, that what is good, they're calling evil, and what's evil, they're calling good.
Yes.
And so they're publicly doing these things that we know are wrong and evil, yet they're saying, you're bad for even saying that it's evil, you're the evil one.
Right. To call anything evil is an evil in the eyes of a lot of people today.
Right.
We're also going to see, and I realize this is a little sensitive, but we're also going to see certain value systems lived out. For example, I work a lot in the Muslim world and love my Muslim friends. Please don't misunderstand. But you put another 1 million Muslim immigrants in Europe, rapes skyrocket, abuse of women skyrockets. I mean, I'd say this with 50 mullahs sitting right here in this room. I've said this publicly in the Muslim world, and they agree. You're right. That side of who we are, we don't like. But that's bedeviling Europe. I mean, look what's going on in Paris especially. And so we're going to see as when you have the restraints taken off, again, let's say all restraints, legal and otherwise, taken off of you and me, we'll find out who we are.
Yeah.
We're going to get drugged up and go rape everybody and rob everybody, or are we going to live moral lives and prosper and do good things for people and raise a family that extends for generations? What are we going to do? We'll find out when the restraints are removed.
Well, and I think right now with the algorithm on the internet, all the social media, we're being fed what kind of let's say they quotations want us to think.
Right.
Like, oh, this is the way it is, and this is right, and this is wrong. And I was talking to my business partner, Benedict Perry, about this, and he's like, algorithm is the leader right now.
Yes.
So who controls the algorithm has a lot to say with who's, leading society.
You are always looking in what someone thinks is your mirror.
Yes.
Right? So I've got that. For example, you know, I do some searches for religious topics and all that, and sometimes I get the most wacko religious stuff back because somebody thinks, well, he wants to see something, you know, he wants to see something, and it's ridiculous. It's silly. It's a caricature. It's a film clip from a movie picking on religion. But because it's religion, they think I want to see it. And so you're always looking in what somebody thinks is your mirror, and you got to change it. You got to change it technologically, but also watch what it is you're doing. If you're searching for porn all the time, then that's what's going to bounce back. Hey, it's a reflection of who you are to some degree.
Sure. Yeah. What do you think right now? Because you're talking about what happened in Europe with the Muslims, you know, kind of overflowing right now. What do you think about our southern border in the United States and all of the people that are just being let across right now?
Yeah, I think I completely believe in immigration. I believe it's one of the great things about America. I believe it has to be done right. As Dennis Miller jokes, sign the dang guest book, you know, come in the right way.
Right.
But no nation can survive if its borders are removed and if people are flooding over. And so all the recent administrations have failed in that regard. And we're going to have to get on top of that. Now, we got to have immigration. You know, we don't even have enough birth rate. We don't have a high enough birth rate in the United States to replace our population. So immigration is part of how we've thrived, part of how we've grown. We want that. But I'll tell you, there are countries in Europe, if they don't do something dramatic, they will cease to exist in their traditional sense, absolutely cease to exist. We're far from that yet, but it could still happen, and we're laying the foundation for it. And I got to tell you, I'm stunned that our federal government hasn't acted. Absolutely stunned. Left, right, or center, I'm stunned.
Yeah, why do you think that's going on right now?
Some people, frankly, believe that by letting immigrants in, you eventually have voters for one party or the other. There's no question that's part of the thinking. Because both parties are shrinking demographically if we don't have immigration. But we've lost the sense that there's an American culture you want to integrate people into, right? You used to have to take an exam, and you had to know who George Washington was, and what the First Amendment was, and what the Bill of Rights was, and things of that nature. Now, it's very quick. In fact, you know, President Biden just naturalized about 500,000 people by decree. Now, I'm not playing narrow politics with you. No president should be able to do that. There should be a process for it. So we're in trouble. We're in trouble if we don't close that. And I think it's either the wrong-headedness or the laziness of people in Washington. And I understand I'm not in any radical violent group, but I certainly understand people going down to the border, protecting their property, and you know, trying to be some kind of militia to keep that from happening, because it is dangerous. And by the way, I lived in West Texas for about a decade, and I'll tell you, people die.
Yeah,
those folks, not all of them, obviously, would come across the border, and they're in a land of prosperity, and they will kill and they will steal, and it's vicious.
Yeah, I saw an interview with some people coming from Africa.
Yeah,
and they were openly talking about being okay to rape women. So that was their culture from where they were. But you know, hearing it was just like, whoa! They're just letting these people in the country.
No question. I'll tell you what. American women, the average American woman, is safer than she would be in almost any other place in the world.
Yeah.
So I grieve the state of women, because they are the one. You know, if you have survival of the fittest, who's going to hurt the most? Women. Sure. Men have got the physical strength to pull things off, and the same thing's going on here. Immigration, women are hurt. Bring people in from other cultures where rape is normal, where women are oppressed, where women are property. Women hurt.
Yeah.
And that's happening in our society. Honor killings in the Muslim world, no question about that. I can just murder my daughter if she misbehaves sexually. That's going on in Detroit, which is one of the most Arab intense regions of our country. They deal with honor killings all the time.
Really?
Oh gosh, yes.
I haven't heard of that.
Yeah. Do a Google search for honor killings, and maybe put Detroit in there too. You know, that's where some of the folks who are Palestinians and what have you in Congress are from. And sure, you have a high concentration of Muslims, especially traditional style Muslims, not more westernized and contemporary. You will have honor killings.
Wow.
And of wives, of daughters, of relatives. It's considered part of the old school Islam, hardcore Islam. Yeah, no question.
Yeah, it seems strange that the left, who, I'm not going to say they're more for women's rights, because everything's a little crazy right now, but the left, who would completely be against the ideas of, you know, Muslim men, more, you know, traditional Muslim men,
right,
are just encouraging all of them to, you know, come illegally, you know, at our southern border.
Yeah, yeah, and they just have no idea people just have no idea the price of this long term. It's really tragic. I mean, women. I would have to say, when I look at the college campus riots and protests, and I see the young girls who are protesting. I realize they're trying to protest about a war. They just have no sense of the broader context,
Right.
and they don't realize what they're bringing. In fact, I know there is a situation we just recently intervened in where a girl started dating an Arab young man from a certain country in the Middle East, not realizing that she thinks this is the great love affair, international love affair. He's already got 3 wives back home. If she marries him and goes back to his home, she'll not be able to come back to the States.
Wow.
This has been repeated time. I mean, movies have been made about that dynamic. So they're just naive. They're just naive.
There's a lot of that right now. You're in Washington, D.C. You said you're doing some consulting for different politicians and things like that. What are you doing with that? How does that work?
Well, I have kind of an unofficial status as a diplomat. I shouldn't even use that word. Just as a guy who's friendly to the Kurds, spend times with them. For example, I went to Iraq, as I say, a few weeks ago. I was with the president of the country. I was with the leaders, finding out what's going on. What are the challenges? What's happening? What's Baghdad doing to you? Because they have this tension with the Baghdad down in the south. And the State Department doesn't necessarily hear these things. Maybe they don't believe them. And so when I come back, just because I'm in D.C. and I've got some friends who are congressmen and I sit, work out with them and sit in the sauna with them or whatever, I can turn to them and say, look, this is what I was told by so-and-so. This is what I was told. They're saying that what you're being told isn't right. Would you check it out? Would you investigate this? And so I can help move things a little bit more I've learned that almost every nation that's really, trying to get America's attention has got these informal people like me who are just friends. But they say, hey, would you mind talking to them next time you're having a hamburger? Because we're not getting anywhere with the State Department. And I have been able, by God's grace, to do some good. And I appreciate having that role. I'm not paid. I'm not a lobbyist. It's just that I have other charity works to do over there. And then while I'm there, we'll sit down, have some food, have some, kebab, and talk about what really needs to be changed in Washington. Because, our congressmen and our senators are good people, but, you can become a successful guy, running a car dealership. You get elected to Congress doesn't mean you know anything about the Middle East.
Right.
I'm not putting them down. I'm just saying I want to be that guy that can say, hey, I don't know anything about the Kurds. Talk to me and help them make good policy about the Kurds.
So you said that most of the Congress and Senate are good people. So you're there. You believe that most of them are good people?
I think there are serious patriots. I think there are good people. Now, there are some who are just nitwits. We all know that. Some who've lied to get there. Some who are extremist, weird. I really almost hate America and ran for Congress on that vibe. We know that, and I don't need to name any names. But I would say that among the people I know, even if I don't agree with them on whatever issues we might be talking about, they're good people, they're patriots, they love their country, and they're trying to do good things. Now, we got some problems in our laws. I don't think congressmen should have to run for office every 2 years. That means you swear them in tomorrow, and on Friday, they're having to run again. That's just a waste of time. We should change those laws. We should change the law that allows one person to call for the speaker's seat to be vacated. One congressman and lock the whole thing up for months. So we've got some weird things like that. But for the most part, I think they're good people. They're good people trapped in a questionable system.
Yeah, but what do you think about term limits? You think that'd be good to?
I do think term limits are best. I believe in the Cincinnatus vision from our early history, this Roman statesman, who came in, ruled, and then went back to his farm. That was always the idea of the founding fathers. George Washington did it. He resigned, left the presidency, went back to, his farm, and I believe in it very much. So, I'm going to mention Joe Biden. I'm not putting him down. I'm not playing narrow politics. 50 years in Washington, D.C. 50 years. How about some fresh ideas? How about some youth? I'm not trying to be ageist. You've got people who have been there, Edward Kennedy, I could name 40 of them, there for decades. Well, wouldn't we have a better Congress? I mean, aren't you and I better for having our hands in the real world, working in business, whatever we're doing in media, we work in business. We have to figure out budgets and make things work in the real world. Wouldn't that make us better in Congress for 5 or 10 years? And then we go home and go back to what we do? I believe very much in term limits. And I realize some people say you have term limits, they're elections. But some of these guys have been there for half a century. And their ideas are old, and corruption does set in. I think we ought to be asking, how do people who make $200,000 a year become $25 million people?
Yes.
So I'm not accusing Biden or anybody else of corruption, but I think we'd be better off if we had term limits, yes.
What is the kind of the feeling on the ground in Washington about Biden? Like, not the political pieces that are out there from both sides, but like, what is it kind of is his brain there? Like, does he have dementia? Is that kind of like a
yeah? I don't know anyone in D.C. and I believe you should speak well of your leaders and be kind if you can. So I'm not just gunning for him. I don't know anyone in D.C. who doesn't believe that if he was running for the first time tomorrow, he wouldn't qualify. In fact, there are a lot of people who think we ought to have, given we have older folks in office, we ought to have basic medical checks, just basic cognitive, right? I wouldn't have any problem with that. But I don't know anyone in D.C., left, right, or center, who confidentially doesn't say, absolutely, he's got dementia. And the only thing they put their hope in is that what you do is you build an administration, and the administration runs the country. We have a tendency to focus on the imperial presidency, as they call it, the one guy. But he's running thousands of people, and other people are running thousands of people, and he's more the figurehead. Most things are done for him. But I can tell you, having been in the Middle East, which is a very macho place, very, very focused on manhood, every time Biden walks across the stage, we lose rank. We lose prestige. And I'm sorry to say it that way. I'll probably be. Hopefully one day I'll live till I'm 90, and I'll waddle across the stage. I hope my kids will be kind to me when I do. But my point is that we're talking about the leader of the free world at a critical time in history.
But almost like sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say the other side. Maybe you're going to say the same thing. I've watched Trump go off script and lose it too. So I'm not saying he's as far along as Biden, but we've just got older people in office, and it's a danger. It is a danger.
Yeah, I think looking at Biden, it seems to me it's almost like elderly abuse. I mean, he doesn't move his arms when he walks. It's a very he looks like he has dementia, and I feel bad for him because they're putting him up there seemingly as a prop. And you mentioned you have your administration. I posted something last week that I kept for 2 years. I didn't post it because it made me nervous, because I was waiting for the rest of the mainstream media to do it, and I'm like, okay, this is almost my duty now to do this. But there was a video of Biden in July 25th of 2022 that the White House put out, and someone posted it on social media. And actually, there was one of my friends that shared a story. And I wrote him and said, hey, that's a deep fake. Biden didn't really say that. Don't you? Just FYI. Because I'm not a Biden fan, but I don't like fake news to go out
absolutely.
being spread.
I feel the same way.
And he said, the White House put that out. And I was like, no. So I go, sure enough, the White House put it out. And I watched it closely. So then I'm trying to prove myself wrong. I run this video, and it's talking about the insurrection, and it wasn't his voice, and it was, you could tell the eyes. He blinked one time in the minute 57 clip that I put up, and I ran it through a deepfake analyzer, and it was a deepfake version of Biden put out from the White House. And I'm all for, if anybody's listened, first time I talked about it on the podcast, anybody who wants to fact check it, and please prove me wrong. I'm not against it. I want to be wrong, but I think I got to speak the truth now. And, so that it has me so worried, because if they're able to put an artificial version of our president out there.
No, there's no question they can.
Yeah.
I've actually been in an AI lab where they, just to demonstrate to me, they took me and had me saying they were being ridiculous. Like, I was trashing Jesus, and I was pro-Marxist, and I was, I said crazy things like I'm going to strip now. But if you've been watching it, you would have thought, well, that is Stephen Mansfield. I mean, I looked as natural as I look right now to you. But the question I have about Biden is, don't we have a deeper bench than that in both parties? I mean, don't you love it in the NFL when a quarterback maybe gets banged up a little bit, they bring a guy off the bench and he goes even further, and you're like, man, this is a team. Well, I think it's an insult to the Democrats, certainly, and to our country, that we don't have a deeper bench. And I'll tell you the other thing, it's also a tribute to the criminalization of politics. To run for office today, and I work with a lot of them that do, you've got to have your whole family in armor, man. I mean, they are coming for you.
Yeah.
And they're not just talking about bashing you and talking about what you did in high school. They're talking about putting you in jail.
Yeah.
And that keeps a lot of good people from running for office. So we don't have very deep benches. No,
that's absolutely correct. I was kind of, when I was looking into you, I saw a C-SPAN interview you did, I think it was 2017, about your book about Trump.
Yeah.
And so I didn't support Trump in 2016. And when he got my parents support Trump, my business partners, it's fine. I mean, I have a lot of friends that support Trump too. I didn't support Clinton either, by the way.
Right, me too.
But, my concern was his rhetoric was going to divide the country so much. Even if I agreed with what he was saying in general. I didn't agree with the way he was saying it, but that it was going to cause so much of a divide we weren't going to be able to make it back. And you talked about that in that interview and in your book, and I liked the assessment overall because it was logical. You weren't throwing him under the bus, but you were just stating these words are going to make a certain group of people feel that way.
Right.
Writing that book, what was that like, and what was the process of putting it out and doing the interviews?
Well, it was fascinating because I sometimes I'm too moderate for people, right? And a little scholarly maybe at times. I wanted to write a truthful book about Trump. It's neither pro nor con. And people are used to, when they're dealing with political books, to books that are radically pro or radically anti. And what I was trying to show is why Trump got elected. And the main reason he got elected, he'd said in his his convention acceptance speech, he said, "I'm your voice." He was the voice for a lot of people who did not feel represented in politics. Some evangelicals, a whole lot of what I would call the Bubba vote. By the way, all of my cousins are Bubba, so I'm not being insulting. I'm from a southern Georgia family. And people felt heard. And so the nastier stuff he said, the harsher stuff, the more violent stuff, that offended, elite New York. But these people said, well, that's how we talk around our breakfast table. So this guy's finally talking our language. This billionaire from New York is actually representing what we believe sitting around our breakfast table in Birmingham. And that's why he got elected. Well, the same thing's going on right now. You and I might find him irritating or disgusting or saying ridiculous stuff. But a lot of America is saying, that's who I am, good, bad, or ugly, and I'm going to vote for this guy. And by the way, you and I are sitting here week before 4th of July in 2024. If the election was held tomorrow, Donald Trump wins.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and I want him to win now, just because of Biden. And I look at the good versus evil thing, and I also heard you talking about, from a Christian standpoint, that's actually something that bothered me, because I was thinking, okay, I was raised Church of Christ, which is strict.
Yeah.
And I saw the very same people that would have, and I'm not knocking the church, I don't mean it in that way, but very judgmental towards, dancing or this or that growing up. Yet a lot of those people were supporting him, making excuses for the things that he was saying.
Right.
And, it really, took me back, but now I don't feel like we even have a choice. And I almost feel like we're in a dogfight.
Yeah.
And we've, the direct truth, I would rather that be said than living in a complete lie.
Yeah. No, I hear you. And that has devastated churches, that dynamic you point out, because you've got this church and it's, urging a moral grid on all of its followers and all of its attendees. And then suddenly we're all good with Trump of the, porn stars and the whatevers. And the youth are going, what are you to? Of course, the youth are already a little moving to the left politically. And now these people just worship Trump. The pastor's preaching about Trump, and it's absolutely ripped up families and ripped up churches, no question about it. But you're right. The old saying is, if you get in a fight with a pig, everybody gets muddy, but only the pig likes it.
Right.
Well, a lot of people who don't really like it are having to get into this election and back somebody they wouldn't have backed 5 years ago because they feel like the issues are desperate. I mean, he may be, as one person said, this is not me talking on television, he may be a buffoon, but at least he's going to be a buffoon about the right issues, or he's going to deal with the right issues. And I'll tell you, his from the inside, his administration was chaos, turnover constantly. Records weren't kept. We see what happened with secure files and all that kind of thing. It's all going to happen again. But some folks are like, if he'll just put the right people on the Supreme Court, secure the borders, and smash NATO, I'm happy. And they're that simplistic about it. So that may be the way the election goes.
Well, yeah, and I look at the debt right now.
Yeah.
What's going on with the debt? And people, it was just complete propaganda that came out 2 days ago talking about how Trump had more debt than Biden, but they were doing projections over 10 years. So the headlines were totally bogus and making people think that he raised the debt more than Biden. And he almost did, but then he had COVID in 2020. He was on a really good track, So it's all misleading. But, big picture, for our national, somebody's going to have to tackle it with $35 trillion in debt right now.
You got to deal with it.
And if we don't, we're done.
And I will say, I don't think you got the two people who take debt the least seriously are business people and politicians. And we've got one running for president and the other running for president. Business people tend to think we'll grow our way out of this. And so they don't sweat it too much. And politicians, of course, just say borrow, we'll never have to pay it back, basically is what they're saying. But it's becoming critical. And by the way, I hear a lot traveling in the capitals of the world. I hear a lot of criticism about America and an unwillingness to do long-term deals with America.
Yeah.
I'm talking about very powerful nations. So we've got to get that straight.
Yeah, the debt is, it's to me, probably our biggest threat because, if interest rates are high, debt right now is what, $1 trillion a year just in debt.
Yeah.
And
but we had it tamed as recently as the Clinton administration.
Yes,
so this
balanced budget.
We can do this.
Yeah.
We can do this. Let's go.
Absolutely. Yeah.
There's just not the will.
Yeah, there's got to be the will.
Right.
I mean, and people have to understand it on both sides because what you've seen is Republicans get in office, they raise the debt. Democrats get in office, they raise the debt. Republicans, it's back and forth. And it's
two parties doing the same thing under different names. Exactly. And that has been our heritage for a lot of years.
So, with this election coming up, what's your view on it? What do you think is going to happen?
I think Trump's going to win. I will probably hold my nose and vote for him, to be frank with you. I dislike a lot about him. I am a Christian, and so obviously I think I'd like for somebody to behave presidentially. But he'll bring good people into the government, and I maybe a little bit more than some folks because I'm there in D.C. I see how an administration is built, and you got good people running programs, and good can happen even if the head guy is a nitwit. I don't think Trump's a nitwit, but some people have been. So I may just make myself vote for Trump, by the way, for the first time. Because I too have, like you, put off by him, but I certainly never voted for Hillary Clinton, and I can't vote for Biden. So I wish there were better candidates.
What do you think about the weaponization of the DOJ right now, with him and kind of and with the states as well?
I think that's unbelievably dangerous. Now that's something, if you're going to ask me to talk about the top 3 things that threaten America, people aren't really listening. The average guy sitting on his, drinking his coffee in the morning, reading his paper or on his online news, he's not aware of what a threat that is. But if you weaponize the Department of Justice, the FBI, and perhaps even the CIA to some degree, you are moving very closely to being a dictatorial state.
Yeah.
I mean, you're near Nazis, you're near the communist parties of major nations. I mean, you are the dark days of the Russian Empire and then Soviet Union. That is very serious, and we need to be going after that. And by the way, I don't like it when politicians get put in jail for things that are fairly light. But anybody who cooperated with that or called for that or said, hey, why don't you guys act in my behalf in this legal prosecution? Those people need to go to jail.
I agree.
No question.
I agree. And people talk about the retribution. I mean, if Trump is in office, I'm trying to put myself in his shoes. And if I were going through what he was going through, not just from a revenge standpoint, but he's being, it's wrong. I would go after everybody. I would subpoena all of their phone records. I would get all of the info from New York to Georgia to Florida to, all of them, and go after everyone.
And this is what ticks me off about Trump. He's got the courage to go after them for righteous reasons. But what does he get up and talk about? I'm going to go after those who wronged me. You see what I mean? So you're like, come on, you're so close to the truth. You're so close to what needs to happen.
Yes.
And then you make it about some petty revenge thing, some journalist who wronged you. Grow up.
Yeah.
So I'm expressing my irritation, but he's got the courage to do the right thing and to withstand the storm.
Yep.
Sometimes he's just so petty, like an offended 16-year-old.
But you are right. Like, I've grown to like him a lot more.
Yeah.
I really have. And, I try to put myself in his shoes and, understand he's raised different, has a different idea about, how things are.
Yeah.
And, he does have a lot of courage because the ones that he's standing up against, if I take a step back, I'm like, well, that's who I consider evil.
Right.
And you have these evil, organizations. And for whatever reason, let's say that Trump God's picking him. He's here he's the only one standing up at that level to defend right now. And so I do respect him, going especially with the more people attacking him. The Russia thing turned out to be bogus.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, it's obvious they're trying to get him out.
No question. And they're doing it with the legal procedures.
Right.
So,
exactly.
I mean, I certainly understand the man coming in office with a vengeance.
Sure.
At the same time, we've got to have a reset. Otherwise, we're going to turn into a third world country where we're just imprisoning our enemies and lining them up against walls and shooting them, and that's where we're going to be heading.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's go to some of your books. So, you have so many. We would be talking forever if we went through every single one of them. But The Faith of George W. Bush.
Yeah.
How did you write that book?
I had been paying attention to faith in American politics for a lot of years. And then along came Bush. He'd been president for 4 years. And people liked him, but he was heading towards a really tough second presidential race. And he was talking a lot about his faith. Well, bless George Bush's heart, but he's not very articulate, right? I mean, we still don't know what the heck he was talking about. So I still don't know what strategically means or what it means to take the high horse on the low road and all that kind of stuff. So we can laugh about him forever. But people wanted to understand what his faith was. And not only did I have an academic background in that area of American religion, I knew people who had been with him. And I'd had a book on Winston Churchill come out and do very well, and the Bush family liked it. So they kind of extended their scepter, brought me in, gave permission for people to talk to me. His high school history teacher, who was the most influential person in his life, his mother, people like that would talk when they had never talked to anybody who was doing a book about him. So I got access. And then I also wrote it in a tone that was not, narrowly religious, but here's the influence on the guy, and here's how it changed his values and so on. And his character was dramatically changed. He was a guy getting drunk at the restaurant, putting people up against the wall in front of their families. He did this all the time in both D.C. and out in Midland, Odessa. So when he had a profound turn just before the age of 40, it dramatically affected him politically and personally. People wanted to understand how, because they were about to have another race. So I was able to get on the inside, write the story, and it's still my biggest seller. It sold millions, and I'm grateful for it.
So what happened with him? So before he was 40,
before he was 40, the best way to understand him is that he had this contentious relationship with his father. And, George H.W. Bush was accomplished, Yale and Navy and CIA and billionaire coming out of West Texas Oil. And I mean, how could you compete with a guy like that? So if you're not seeing yourself as part of his legacy and an extension of who he is, then you just resent the heck out of him. And that's exactly how it was. So he was a heavy drinking. He and his father actually got in fistfights. He'd come home drunk and start picking a fight. I mean, it was that bad.
Wow.
And then finally some guys got him into a Bible study, started talking to him straight. He had a serious conversion. He walked on a beach with Billy Graham, as he famously tells the story, although I don't think that's where the turn took place. And it really began to take root in him. And I think we need to take those stories seriously. Your own story, for example. Hey, I raised in kind of a legalistic thing, you say, and then I walked away and now I'm coming back. Yeah. I mean, that shapes who you are. Anybody who's going to understand you and work with you needs to understand that side of you. Well, all the more for a president. So fortunately, I was allowed to tell that story. And it's obvious the American people wanted to know the story because the book blew up.
Sure. What was it like interviewing the Bush family? What are they like?
Very, if they don't trust you or they don't know you yet, any big political family with a lot of history they're gonna close ranks. I don't know who you are, and I'm willing to kill you right now, kind of attitude, Yeah. But that's why it takes someone like a Barbara or somebody else in the family to say, talk to Stephen Mansfield, we can trust him. And that's what did it. Now, they didn't know they could trust me because I wasn't going in to write just a puff piece. But they wwere really gracious, really open, told the stories, told the good, bad, and the ugly. I heard about the fist fights. I heard about him getting drunk at, some silly restaurant in West Texas. You don't even know why he's there, but he's down at the end of the bar by himself. And then a political enemy comes in and he beats him up. But I was moved by the story. I really was moved by the story. And I hope I got it on the page right. And it again, when I mentioned the sales, it's not that I'm bragging. I'm saying that means there are people out there who want to know that story before they vote.
Sure. And
the sales rose. And then when the election happened, they dropped a bit, which meant people were trying to get information for the election. They were trying to know who this guy is, see if we should elect him again. We'd had mistakes in Iraq. We'd had 9/11. They knew him to some degree, but is there a better person to take the lead from here? That's what they were trying to decide. I was glad to be part of it.
Yeah, that's awesome. What was is it kind of surreal sitting with that family as he's president?
Yes. Yeah, it's very unusual. I'm a little bit used to the whole Secret Service thing. Working in D.C. and doing things internationally. But when you're with the president, it's a whole other thing. It's a whole other thing. And the family can't really say, "Oh yeah, come on over." They might say that, and the next thing you do, you get a call from Secret Service. Well, you'll need to come over here. We're going to check you. We want to know about this. What were you doing in Iraq exactly? That kind of thing.
Yeah.
So it was a real privilege. It was a real privilege. And the people who told the story the best were his buddies of faith out in Midland, Odessa, guys who were in the oil industry with him, and then were in that Bible study with him and watched him change. And they told the story, I think, the grittiest, which is what I wanted.
How did the family receive the book?
They loved it. They loved it because it was straightforward and it was honest. I mean, I said a couple of things they didn't like his daughters were misbehaving at that time. And I wrote, obviously he has work to do at home. And the next time I saw one of the Bush family members, they said, more to do at home, work to do at home. What are you talking about? They were, because everybody wants to be presented in their best light.
Sure.
But I also think that George W. Bush, and this was a little controversial, I think he's an undiagnosed dyslexic. Or if he has been diagnosed, it's not public. And I think what would it have been like for a sitting president to say, I have gone to Harvard and Yale. I'm president of the United States, been governor of Texas. I mean, I've made money, oil, but I've been a dyslexic my whole life. What would have happened if he'd gotten tested? The whole story was out. What American school kids would have lost their minds with some kind of encouragement that, hey, even with this disability, you can rise. And so I wish he'd been diagnosed and been open about it. Instead, they kind of hid it. But I think, I've got a little background in this stuff, and I think that that's why he inverts words and so on. He's an undiagnosed or at least not publicly diagnosed dyslexic. So I said that in the book is my point. And I think that and what I said about the daughters, although I've met the daughters since and interviewed them and been on stage with them and we're fine, but they were misbehaving pretty badly in those days, and I said so. And
yeah.
That's not going to make Daddy happy.
Yeah, no, I get it. What was Bush like? Or W. Bush like?
Hey, George W?
Yeah.
He's really down to earth, very West Texas. His father's was a little bit more elite, New England, I remember once that with the father, a journalist said, well, what were you thinking about when you got shot down in World War II and you were floating around there in the Pacific Ocean? He said, well, about my family, about the First Amendment. You just thought, he's not thinking about the First Amendment. He's just throwing religious language. That's just,
right.
He's kind of distant and a little emotionally disconnected. But George W. Bush, the West Texas good old boy. He just, hey, get in here, Bubba. That's kind of how he does it, and if he's met you once, he's probably going to remember who you are.
Oh, and cool.
So they liked the book. Newsweek magazine said the book helped him get elected, which I didn't intend to do, but I told the story honestly, and if it helps him, fine with me. So I'm grateful. And he's a guy you'd want to spend time with. I mean, if I had to choose, the party question sometimes people ask, if you're going to have a dinner with 5 people, living or dead, who would it be? Well, my top would be Churchill, and people like that. But I'd have George W. Bush there. I think he's fascinating. I think he's intelligent. And how interesting that an ex-president spends his days painting the portraits of the wounded soldiers he sent into battle. And we've never had anything like that.
Yeah. I'm sure he has to go through a lot, mentally knowing that, we were kind of lied into that war.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying he did it intentionally. Right. I don't think he really probably knew.
Right.
But, if I were president, that would weigh on my mind a lot.
Yeah. There's no question there was some deception and misdeed. At the same time, I'll tell you, the Kurds and the people in Iraq say absolutely Saddam had weapons of mass destruction, and he moved them across the border before the inspectors came. So to this, I'm not trying to take a side.
Sure.
To this day, there's controversy about that, and I think Bush is probably as bugged by people sitting in his living room saying it was right, no, it was wrong, yes, it was right, as he is by the lives lost.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I was talking to an Iraqi Uber driver that was a Christian.
Yeah.
And he actually really liked Saddam. I found it interesting.
Yes,
he was saying that Saddam was good to the Christians. Have you heard that?
I have heard that. When they say that, I say, look, my brother, I love you, but I think you're misguided. I think Saddam was an evil person. His sons were demons. They were absolute raping, pillaging, murdering, hacking up demons. And I think Saddam, sure, when you make a nation better and you make the trains run on time, people love you for it. But this was an evil man.
Yeah.
This was an evil man.
What did you wrote a book about Obama, The Faith of Barack Obama.
Yeah.
How did that
come
about?
Well, again, I like writing about faith and the real world. I've written about faith and a beer company. I've written about faith and, politics and what have you. So Obama's story was interesting because people thought he those who were critical of him said he's a Muslim. He's a closet Muslim. He's not telling us the truth. And yet he said, hey, I'm a born again Christian. And I would hear from people in the White House that would come every Easter. He would do a talk on, on the resurrection of Jesus that would bring tears to people's eyes.
Really?
Oh, yeah. But at the same time, you have the whole Jeremiah Wright controversy, his pastor in the South Side of Chicago.
Yeah, remind me of that one.
Yeah. Jeremiah Wright was this pastor of a large church on the south side of Chicago where Obama went and had his conversion experience.
Okay.
Well, Jeremiah Wright's got cusses in the pulpit, and at 9/11, he said, your chickens have come home to roost and all that stuff, right? And so this was Obama's only pastor when he stepped into the Oval Office. So I thought, well, this is a subject I want to tackle. And I always ask three things. Am I interested in it? Will the people be interested in it? And do I have access? And I did have access because I'd written the Bush book and some other books. Even on the left, they said, this is a guy who tries to write objectively about these things. They knew I was a Christian. They knew I wasn't going to, extol anybody. But so I got to talk to his sister. I got to talk to his campaign managers. I got to talk to people who knew him. I went to that church on the south side of Chicago, spent time with all the people who'd been impacting Obama. And I think I got it right. I think I got it right. And my conclusion is he was not a Muslim. He did live in Indonesia as a youth. He left before the Muslim age of accountability, we would call it in Christianity. He never affirmed faith in Islam and had his days away from God, like a lot of us, and then returned to God on the south side of Chicago at that church. And has been a very liberal Christian. And I tick people off by saying this. He believes Jesus is the Son of God, raised from the dead, died for the sins of the world, gospel, blood-washed gospel that's being preached in evangelical churches in the city. And from that moment forward, he is dramatically left-leaning theologically. So that's what troubles people. When people say, do I think he's born again? As much as I can be sure of any human being, I think he's born again. But after that, what he believes theologically would have been considered heresy throughout most of church history.
Sure.
Because it's so left-leaning. That's just the truth.
That's interesting, though, that I didn't know that he was actually a Christian, though. That's cool.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Did you interview him?
I could not interview him. They wouldn't make him available.
Sure.
But the good news is he had done so many interviews. He was just starting his administration, as I wrote. And also he had written so much about his faith. He'd written 2 books by that point, New York Times bestsellers, et cetera. So I feel like I got to the heart of it. And his family, I'll tell you something that's a little bit inside baseball on what I do. Sometimes the subject, the person, is not the best person to tell their story. You might not be the best person to tell your story.
Sure.
It could be your team, your staff, your wife, your mom. It could be that as I talk to them, I get a better picture than when I talk to you. And that was certainly the case with George W. Bush. He is not an introspective guy. You don't want to sit him down. But talking to mom, talking to pastors, talking to people who've walked with him, that they got the story, I think, right.
If you were to interview Obama, what would you want to ask him?
I'd want to ask him how his faith has changed through the years. Part of what happens to a president is they get so battered for what they believe. Sometimes they back away from it. Sometimes they harden up. Bush definitely softened a bit on his evangelical faith while he was in office. I mean, he actually is a bit pro-gay, surprising for an evangelical conservative, political conservative. Obama just got bashed for what he believed, and so did he just reject anything that touched conservative faith, So I'd like to know about that. I'd like to know if he looks back, and I'd like to know, I like to know about the state of people's souls. So I would ask him, you took a bashing, man. You got bashed for everything. People are walking around today saying your wife's a man and every kind of thing. So what's that done to your soul? And what does that do with your relationship with God? Do you pray for your enemies? I mean, I'd like to understand that side of him.
Interesting. Yeah. It's, I always like to think about, put myself in other people's shoes. I mean, that's something that I try to always do.
Yeah.
And I think about, I didn't really like Obama either as president.
Right. I didn't vote for him.
But, the internet, and it can be a nasty place. And how would I feel if the world was attacking me over stuff that was not true constantly?
Right.
I mean, that's got to mess with you.
Are you married?
No.
Well, let's just imagine that you were. Well, I am, and I'm crazy about my wife. Beat on me all you want. I'm fine. I've been there before, and I chose this life. But beat on my 7-year-old grandson, beat on my wife, beat on my son and my daughter. That, even though I may not be able to do anything about it, hey, they're being mean to me.
Yeah.
They can torture my soul. I'm sure that many presidents, many people in public life stay up all night hurting, trying to get right before the next day because you just want to get get in front of the microphones and take people's heads off. Harry Truman actually did once when a guy wrote a scathing review of his daughter's piano playing. But most presidents don't feel like they can fight back. And I think that must be one of the most torturous sides of the whole thing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's got to be tough. I mean, like you were talking about earlier, a lot of good people don't get into politics because of just the attacks.
I've been told by people I think ought to run. I just won't put my family through it. Yeah. And I'll say, do you have skeletons in your closet? Or are you concerned about them making up skeletons? He said both. He said, my skeletons aren't moral. I didn't do anything illegal. He said, but I've got a daughter who's intellectually, who's troubled, got some health problems and isn't quite right mentally. I'm not going to shove that in front of the cameras,
Yeah.
So it saddens me. It saddens me because nobody's going to be perfect enough to endure this scrutiny.
No, and it's just gotten worse and worse.
Yeah.
And especially as society's changing the philosophy in our country, like they're changing from we're a capitalist Christian country to, not that we're turning into a communist country, but communist ideology is more accepted, and faith is seen as weakness.
Right. And people look into the state for their primary leadership, and of course that affects their whole sense of reliance on God, reliance on themselves. So yeah, I think we're heading in a very dangerous direction. But I will have to say, as a historian, that most of this is fairly recent, and we can turn it around if we want to. That's
how recent you think?
Well, for you and I have been talking about a number of trends that are only a few decades old. The deficit we talked about, a debt, criminalization of politics. That really probably dates to the Reagan administration in the 80s. So we're only talking about 40 years. That's the first time that you began to see people being criminally prosecuted.
Give me an example of that one. I'm not aware.
There was a gentleman whose name I forget. Forgive me. Who underwent just a bashing and a complete criminal investigation. Turned out not to be right, and turns out now we know that those who launched it, who were people on the other side of the aisle who wanted to damage this guy. And he's famous for saying, as he was found not guilty, he went before the cameras and he said, "Now where do I go to get my reputation back?"
Wow.
Now that's only the Reagan administration in the 1980s. So I can't think of any episode of that kind of thing before then. We've had it increasingly since then. One of my friends is a man named Tom DeLay. He was the House Minority Leader some years ago. They bashed him for what at worst was an accounting error. He actually left office over it. And I'm telling you, to this day, I mean, it wasn't anything major at all. Shouldn't even have been an issue. But he got run out of office. His wife's health is damaged by it. But all that's very recent. So the good news about this is not 500 years of the criminalization of politics. This is a few decades and some law firms in D.C. We can deal with that. And so we just have to have the resolve to do it.
Well, Stephen, we could go on for a while. I know that we're going to do a part 2, but I really appreciate you coming on. Thanks, and I could talk to you for, 10 hours or so. So
I can ramble about anything, baby. So let's just go.
It's all really good. Well, thanks so much for coming on, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Great to talk to you.
Thanks.